7 sons and 3 daughters that were born to him, and he owned 7,000 sheep. Did I spell that right? Okay. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among the people of the East. So what do we understand a little bit more about Job? We get a little bit of a biography here. Well, it says he was the greatest man of the East, greatest of the men of the East. So this is a man who was physically very well off. I mean, a very wealthy man in regards to the wealth of the time. It doesn't go into the amount of money he had. It talks about his possessions. But remember, in many cases, the idea of the amount of your possessions kind of denoted how wealthy you truly were. What was probably one of the greatest examples of his wealth? He had herds, but what else did he have? He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And remember, in the time that Job existed, in the mindset of the time, the idea of having a great many offspring, specifically, especially men, male offspring, was an indication of a great blessing from God. And God did bless Job. Job didn't come to all of these possessions on his own. He certainly was blessed by God, and God had blessed him with 7 sons and 3 daughters, plus all of the other stuff, plus a very great household. So not only did he own a great deal, he was responsible for a great many souls, wasn't he? Because that was the responsibility of the head of the household. He was responsible for everyone that was in his household. And it went so far as how did Job care for his family? What was one of the ways that he cared for his family? He offered sacrifices on their behalf to God. And he even says, just in case. I want to make sure that my family's taken care of. Offer up sacrifices on their behalf to God, so that, yes.
How does he compare with Abraham as far as possessions and his position? What was the two different?
I don't know if you would necessarily need to compare them. Of course, you're talking about Abraham. Abraham filled a specific role on behalf of God. Job did fill a job on behalf of God, but it was one as an example, and it was one as an example to one who doubted him, one who was going to bring accusation against him, and God used Job as a shining example, really. But once again, at the very end, it shows that God was pleased with his servant Job. But if you look at the way Job behaves all the way through the book the book that bears his name, a lot of times we look at it and we think, well, Job's not being very patient. He's not being very long-suffering because he continues to question why these things are happening to him, which tells us what about the idea of patience? Job wanted to find out. Job had questions. Job wanted to know, why are these things happening to me? I've not sinned before God. I haven't done any of these things. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Why me as opposed to everybody else? Because likely Job had many people that were around him who did not worship God, and these things weren't happening to them. So all of a sudden he finds himself someone who was blameless and upright, who sacrificed, who did all of these things, who was trying to live an upright life, and was doing so very well. I mean, God even commends him not only to his friends, but also to Satan. He said, consider my servant Job. So he was doing all of these things, but God still allowed these calamities to fall upon him. So he was questioning. And I think many times we think that in order to be patient, we just sort of meekly accept what's going on. And sometimes patience is while we do accept it, we can question. We can try to find out why. What's going on? But it all boils down to what we're going to talk about at the very end is realizing, well, like I said, we're going to get to it in a second. But Job was blessed by God. Why was Job blessed by God? Okay, he was an upright man. It says he was blameless and upright. Now, what is blameless? Does blameless mean sinless? No, it doesn't mean sinless. It doesn't mean that Job never sinned. He was not perfect. He was not perfect in that way. But it says that he was blameless. What does blameless mean? What does it mean to be blameless? Okay, it could certainly take into consideration the idea of being well thought of. Right. And that's the idea of blameless means he strove to keep from sinning intentionally. His idea was, remember when he offered up these sacrifices, he offered them up, he said, perhaps my children have sinned. And that kind of gives us an idea into his mindset. He did not want to be found intentionally sinning before God. And can we sin unintentionally? Certainly, of course we can. But Job was of the mindset that not only am I not going to sin intentionally, but I don't even want to sin unintentionally, and if I do, I want to make amends for it. So this is a man who was blameless. You couldn't look at him and cast blame. The idea, of course, is blame. You couldn't look at Job and cast that kind of blame on him. And he wanted to appear that way and remain that way before God. So, yeah, the idea of blameless. When we look at them, we want to see a man who strives. He does very much as he possibly can to not sin intentionally, and to, if he sins unintentionally, to make amends for it, to do whatever he can so that he can be the kind of example to the flock that he's supposed to be. So this man was blameless and he was upright. And the idea of upright, of course, is what God said to do. That's what he did. The commands God gave, he followed them in all the ways that he was supposed to do that. So Job was he was like an ideal neighbor. I mean, he did what he was supposed to do. He acted the way he was supposed to act. And because of this, God blessed him. And it's good to see that Job was a man that as he was being blessed, did he start taking away his reliance on God? As so many people do. So many people, once they begin to be blessed, all of a sudden they begin to rely less and less on God and more on self. They start thinking to themselves, well, maybe this is me. I've caused all these things to happen. Now, Job didn't go that route. As God's blessing him, he actually becomes more and more dependent on God, and he realizes where he has his subsistence. Okay? So, Job was blessed, and he was blessed because of the way he acted, and in return, God continued to bless him because he saw he was faithful in a few things. He continued to bless him in all the ways he was supposed to. Now, in Job 1, verses 6 and 7, now I'm not going to get into the idea about the sons of God coming and presenting themselves before the Lord. That's a lesson for another time because we're talking about patience. But there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came in among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking back and forth on it." What does that tell us? Has Satan always been? I want you to understand what I mean by that. Has Satan always been king of this earth? He's always been in control of this earth in that way. I'm not saying that he has total control of the earth. What I'm saying is that this is Satan's domain. Satan is here, and he is constantly at our throats. He literally is like a roaring lion that wanders around seeking whom he may devour. So Satan tells God, he says, "This is what I'm doing. I'm walking forth." Now he wasn't minding his own business as he's traveling to and fro on the earth and from walking back and forth on it. What is he doing? He's doing what Satan does. Satan is the adversary. He is against us at all times. There's never a time where we're at peace with Satan. Satan hates us. Even when we're in sin, we're not at peace with Satan. It's not like we've thrown our lots in and we're compatriots. Satan still hates us. Yes. Yes. And yep. Right. Oh, wow. That's a spurious article. Yeah, right. 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 Absolutely. And not only does Satan accuse us before God, he accuses us before each other, and he accuses God before us. Remember, what did Satan do? What did Satan do in the garden to Eve? What did he accuse God of? He accused God. Yeah, he did not mean. That's not what he meant. And Satan accuses God before Eve. He accuses us before each other. He accuses us before God. He's not. The thing we need to remember about Satan is Satan has no loyalty. There is no. He's not going to protect his own. What's Satan's overall intent? What is his intent? He wants all to be lost. None of us are friends to Satan. Has no friends, and I think that was, of course, what enables him to do what he does. He has no friends. He has no loyalty. He has no love for anyone. He doesn't really. I'm looking at it from a human standpoint. He doesn't really even love himself. He desires everybody to be lost. He wants everyone to spend an eternity in hell, the hell that's been reserved for Satan and his angels. So he's going there. He wants all of us to go there. So he's going to say or do anything that it takes in order to get us there. He'll lie to us. He'll tell us the truth if that's what it takes. All of these things. So Satan he's going to and fro on the earth. He has dominion over this earth. He's going and he's doing. He's engaging in all of the activities that he engages in. So he answers him. And then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Now here, what's Job doing? What's God doing to Satan? What's God doing on behalf of Job? Where Satan would accuse Job, or where Satan would accuse God, what is God doing? He's confirming his servant Job. I look at this in the aspect of God is confessing Job before Satan. He's telling him, he says, "Have you considered my servant Job? That there is none who fears God and shuns evil." What does that tell us about God? God sees all, doesn't he? God knows us even when we don't know. Job exhibited patience and long suffering. We're not just doing a biography here, and we're kind of building the case for the patience of Job. So he said, "If you consider my servant Job, there's none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil." We already answered the question, what is blameless? So Satan answered the Lord. Satan answered the Lord, and he accuses Job before God. He accuses him. Does Job fear God for nothing? Now, this is not just an idea of accusing Job before God. What is he also accusing God of doing? Yeah, you're a respecter person. Have you not made a hedge around him? You've done everything for him. You've kept him from any kind of harm. Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and everything that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands. It's interesting they would accuse him and that's how he would accuse him. Well, you've blessed the work of his hands. Well, certainly so. That's not an accusation. That's just telling the truth. Of course he has. God's blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now, stretch out. Now, what is Job convincing God to do? He will. But what is Satan tempting God to do here? But now, stretch out. What does he say? Stretch out your hand. Stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. So here Job is, or I'm getting all three of my characters. Satan is tempting God to strike down the very man that he's blessed. He's trying to get God to do his dirty work for him. I don't want to touch him. You stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. Kind of is. You have your faith in Job is misplaced. Why in the world would you put your faith in this man? Because you know that if you took away what he has, he will curse you to your face. So, and once again, does Satan know? Does Satan know Job? Does Satan know Job? Well, remember, Satan has been involved in Job's life before. I mean, he had to have been, right? Because Job had to have been tempted to sin at some point in the past, and he has tried to avoid sin, but he wasn't sinless. So he knows Job, and what he's trying to do is he's trying to pit Job and his maker against each other, and he's trying to avoid any kind of consequence. He's trying to avoid, I don't have to do my work, I'm going to let them do my work for me. Well, of course. If he doesn't have to, why would you do the work if you can get somebody else to do the work for you? So he will surely curse you to your face, accusing God, accusing Job, accusing them of doing of being what they're not, and not being what they are. So the Lord said to Satan, so the Lord's going to bring it back on Satan. He's going to lay it back on him in verse 12. Behold, all that he has is in your power, and only do not lay a hand on his. So what does that mean? Did Satan have that kind of power over Job beforehand? Did God allow him to do this? God had to allow Satan to do the thing that he's about to do. Yes. Yeah. God cannot give our power of self-will over to Satan. The only thing that he would give Satan is the physical power over him. He couldn't say his soul is in your power. He says that everything that he has, all of his physical possessions, his physical body, as we're going to see in just a few minutes, that's what's in your possession. But his soul is his to determine. He still has free will to do as he wishes. But you could take his stuff. Well, let's see. So all that he has physically is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person. So his physical body is still in his own realm at this time. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now we don't know how far down the road this is, but now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them when the Sabaeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Okay, now at this point, is this certainly something that Job could foresee happening? Being a wealthy man, and certainly all of his possessions being coveted by his neighbors, he could certainly see something like this as being a possibility. When you have animals in that great a number, they have to take up that much land. There's always the possibility of some third party coming in, taking what's yours, and hey, I might have to go get them. Okay, so he when he's hearing this news for the first time, he's thinking to himself, this is possibility. He's not fully prepared for what is going to continue to happen to him. All right. So I have indeed they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Now, this is talking about adding insult to injury, because this just keeps piling up on Job. This is not 6 months down the road. This is while this servant was still speaking to Job, another also came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Now, was that servant accurate? Was it the fire of God that came down and consumed them? No, the stuff that Job had was in the power of Satan. And certainly Satan acts as if wants to appear as one who is a heavenly being, but that's not the case. So something happened, and the servant attributes it to God. So the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, so this is two servants, one right after the other, dropping in. While he was still speaking, another one came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands and raided the camels and took them away, yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So 1, 2, 3, right after the other, the dominoes are falling in Job's life. And Job had a very pleasant existence. I mean, everything that he had was being blessed, and all of a sudden everything that he has is being touched in a bad way. Everything is being pulled away from him. Everything is his house is slowly crumbling. The pieces of it are slowly crumbling. But this is the worst one. I think I believe, and based on the scripture directly after this, this is where Job's life really fell to pieces. And I think this is really where his demeanor changes. While he was still speaking, the third servant, fourth servant, also came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. And a lot of people will think, what, a wind? I watched a couple of videos of some of those windstorms that sweep across the area where Job was living, and those winds are certainly enough to drop a house. It's not. This is something be very easy to happen. So Job's lost his possessions. He's lost his servants. And of course, that's something that's going to affect him deeply. But I know at this point, Job is still looking at it as these are possessions. These are things. I'm sure he mourned the loss of the servants But he's looking at those things and saying, my physical possessions can be replaced. But here, this is where the great blow occurs. I think even his physical calamity that befalls him later on is not to the extent of losing those 10 children, plus all of their spouses and any other family that might be with them. So the 7 sons and the 3 daughters are gone, and this, I believe, is really the one that hits him the hardest, because it says, "Then Job arose." In my translation, said, "Then after this, or upon hearing this, Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and did what? He worshipped." What was he worshiping? He certainly wasn't worshiping his physical possessions. He wasn't worshiping himself. Who did he worship? He worshiped God. So he falls to the ground and he worships. Who else does this remind us of? David, remember? After he realized that his son was not going to come back to him, that his son had died, and due to his misfortune, due to his sin, David arises from the ground instead. He gets up and he washes himself, he puts on clothes, and he goes and he worships. So these are 2 great men of faith, but they're behaving with the same attitude, but they're coming from different circumstances. So he arose, he rises from the ground, he tears his robe, he shaves his head, and he falls to the ground, he worships, and he says, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there." What does that mean? What's the grand lesson of that? Yeah, listen, when I came into this earth, I had nothing. God had not given me anything. He gave me life. God gives life, and he takes life away. I came into this world with nothing. I'm going to leave with nothing. And at this point, he's really honestly believing that's what's going to happen. I'm not going to take anything with me when I go. Now, this gives us a good insight into the idea of the mindset of the people of God, people who truly worship God, because the people that surrounded him believed what? That you could take things with you. That what you're blessed with in this life, you can carry with you into the next life. And Job's saying very specifically, no, that's not what happens. I come into this life with nothing, and I will leave with nothing. God gives me, blesses me through my life, and at the end of my life, he's apparently seen fit to take it all away again. Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Now, it's interesting that Job uses that terminology. He said, "The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away." So what is his mindset at this point? What is he thinking? Okay. He said, God gave it to me. Who else could take it away from me but God himself? But and interesting, though, he says, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." So even in spite of this, realizing that while his stuff had been taken, and even though he believed that God had either taken it away personally or allowed it to be taken away, he still says, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." Okay, this once again brings us into this idea, this insight of the long-suffering of Job's nature. What's going to happen? He doesn't know how long this is going to happen. He doesn't know how long this circumstance is going to continue on. But even then, he says, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all of this, and all of the things that are happening, and every utterance from his lips, everything he says Job did not sin nor charge God with wrong. Now this is interesting. This is key. He says that the Lord has taken away, but he did not charge God with wrong. Now what does that tell us? The way he's looking at this is that even if God took this away from me, even if God allowed this to be taken away from me, God did it because of his good pleasure, because he desired it. And anything that God desires is right, whether or not I agree with it, whether or not it comforts me, whether or not it takes comfort away from me, no matter what happens to me personally, anything that God does is righteous. And if he saw fit to take, and remember, this goes into the very idea of his mindset about what did I do wrong. See, here he's saying, if God took it away, God didn't do wrong in taking it away. What did I do wrong? I had to have done something in order for this stuff for my life to be torn apart the way that it did. I had to have sinned in some way. What did I do? What did I do? And he finally comes to the realization that I haven't done anything wrong. God has a plan. God has an idea. God has a concept that I'm just not getting yet, that I don't understand. But it's God that's in charge and not me. And whatever happens because of God. So he does not charge God with wrong. So whatever is happening, it's righteous because it comes from God. And I'm going to live with it the way that I'm supposed to live with it. I'm going to have he's going to long suffer. All right, in Job chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, this is building up again our case for Job's long suffering and his patience. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Now, who knows how long this is in the future? We don't know. It doesn't give us into that insight. But Satan also came in among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" Once again, Satan answers, and basically what I was doing before. I was going to and fro on the earth, and I was walking back and forth on it, doing the things that I do, doing the things that are in his nature, sinful nature, accusing, causing strife, causing mischief, doing the things that I do well. You know, we look at this example of Job and we think, is this the only one that Satan has ever accomplished? No, of course not. Satan does stuff like this all the time. He just picked on the wrong person. Okay, so Satan answers God and he tells him, I'm going from going to and fro on the earth and from walking back and forth on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth?" What's happened to Job in the time that all the first circumstances occurred in this one? Lord's opinion of Job has not what? Hadn't changed. He still says, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth?" He is still, that's my word that I'm putting in there, but I believe it's applicable. He is still blameless. He is still upright man. He is one who still fears God and still shuns evil. In spite of all this time, Job has not yet accused me of wrongdoing. He still shuns evil, and still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause. So Satan answered the Lord, as he is wont to do. And he says, "Skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life." Job would sacrifice all of that if you don't take his life. So he's already accused Job of, if you take away all that he has, he will curse you to your face. Well, when that didn't pan out, that didn't work out, Satan continues to accuse Job. He'll give everything that he has if you just don't take his life. Now, is that true? Is that true? How many people would sacrifice their children for themselves? What kind of parent would sacrifice their son or daughter for themselves to save their own lives? Not much of a parent. I mean, if they're a true parent, of course, they would never do such a thing. So right off the bat, Satan is a liar. We know that. We know that he is. He's the father of lies. He says, all that a man has, he will give for his life. Well, that's just not true. But here, once again, he says, but stretch out, he accuses him again, but stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh. Once again, he's wanting God, you do this. Stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life." Well, if he allows Satan to kill Job, there's not going to be not much of a lesson left. Of course, he wants Job to remain alive because Job is still a blameless and upright man. He loves God and he shuns evil. God's going to protect his servant, but he says, "I'm going to give him his physical body is in your hand, but you can't kill him. You can't kill him." Okay. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and he struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Now, for a long time I didn't know what a boil was. I'd never suffered a boil until I did, and let me tell you, I had one. And that was probably one of the most painful things I've ever felt in my life. You couldn't, even putting your hand close to it, you could feel the heat radiating off of it. And if you just touched it, it felt like somebody was sticking you with a knife. So Satan did just strike Job with one boil. He says he struck him with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. You know, there are so many people who, once they suffer that kind of a physical discomfort, they believe their only recourse. They'd take their own life if that's the kind of pain they're going to suffer for the rest. And Job didn't know how long this is going to occur. At this point, God has taken that hedge away. He's taken that hedge away, that figurative hedge that Satan said that God has erected around him. That hedge has been taken away. And Job doesn't know how long this is going to happen. He doesn't know how long he's going to suffer. He doesn't know how, at this point, he's still sitting in the wreckage of what used to be a fairly pleasant life for himself, a good life for himself. But what does Job do? Does Job curse God? Does Job accuse God? Does Job do anything? He says, "And he took for himself a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes." This sounds like a man who has basically given up. He still exists. He still loves God. He still eschews evil. He's still blameless and upright, but he sounds like a man who has accepted that things are not going to get better for him. And he's questioning. And as his three friends, and then later his fourth friend come, as they begin to accuse him, all of a sudden, I think it's interesting, as they accuse him, we see Job begin to develop a sense of strength again, because he defends himself against their slings and arrows. As they're accusing him and they're saying, God doesn't punish innocent men, he begins to take strength, not only take strength from himself, of course, but take strength from God, and realizing, no, I've done what I was supposed to do. This is something that's beyond me. This is a lesson, this is something that's going on that I'm not privy to, that I've not been made aware of, and then, of course, God begins to speak to them, and he explains what's going on. But anyway, this is a man at this point who's just, you can just see him in your mind's eye. I always thought that this would be one of those great live action things, if somebody could really do the subject matter justice, to do a live action version of Job. But I could see it in my mind's eye. This is a man who's just decided, I give up. I mean, I'm going to exist, but I'm not going to live. I'm not, So, he scrapes himself while he sits in the midst of the ashes. Job 9 and 10. Then his wife said to him. Now, a lot of people like to throw a rock at Job's wife. I think that people, and I think sometimes unfairly. But what does Job's wife say to him? Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. What do you think about that? Do you think that, you think about this as a woman who's watched her husband go from what he once was to what he is today, a broken man who is sitting in ashes, scraping himself with a piece of pottery because he's got boils covering himself all the way. So she's seen this rapid decline from this at one point to this at one point. What do you think? Right. Absolutely. Children. All right. That's right. And at this point, that's really all he's doing, is just going through the motions of living. And like I said, I know a lot of people like to throw it in. I don't know how many times I've seen Job's wife be the butt of jokes. The idea of, of course, that's, curse God and die. She's not. She's saying, how long can you hold fast to this? How long can you keep accepting the fact that this has happened to you? Why don't you just give it up? Because she's under the same impression that who knows how long this is going to be like this. Are our lives ever going to be made whole again? She's suffering the same thing. And Job says to her, he says, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. So he's telling her that her statement was incorrect. He's telling her that her statement is incorrect. Not that she is a fool for saying it, but he says, you're speaking as one of the foolish. Sometimes our children are not fools, but they say foolish things. And that's basically what he's telling her. He's not calling her a fool. He's saying you're speaking foolishness, and that's not to be. We're not to give credence to that. He says you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? So this is a poignant lesson right here, and I think that's one that applies definitely when we talk about the idea of patience and the idea of adversity and how we suffer through things when it doesn't appear that things are going to get better. This is a good lesson for us today. Shall we accept good from God and not accept adversity? Could be. Get him. Could be. I don't believe for 1 second that Job's wife had given up on him, that she no longer loved him and was just ready to get him out of her life and just look, end your misery and just curse God and die. But he's saying, he's giving her the lesson that he's trying to give her is God, as he said before, God is the author of our salvation. He is the giver of all good things. He is the fount of every blessing, and all of the ways that we describe the way that God continues to bless us and all of the good ways that we're blessed. And as God gives, He takes away. But why does He take away? And see, that's the question a lot of people don't want to entertain, because the idea here is that somehow the good things that they have might be taken away. We might lose some of the blessings in our life, the physical things. It's God. What God's still given Job is opportunity. He hasn't allowed Satan to take his life yet. We don't acknowledge his position or his role, his power in our lives. I know a lot of people do that. I think that the church is very. I know that we've had many times we've offered up prayer. And things have happened good. I've never personally heard anybody sit back and sit across from somebody who says, "I blame God for all of my misfortune." But I've certainly seen people in their actions. They certainly accuse God. Oh, well. Oh. That's what I was saying. I've never heard anybody physically say, "I blame God," but I've seen through their actions that certainly they believe God is at fault. Well, yeah. Like I said, I've seen people, like you said, through their. I've never heard anybody say those words, but I've certainly seen people through their action. They're certainly. It appears that that God is at fault. The decision to leave the church, leave the assembly, to turn their backs on their salvation, to go back into the world rather than, I hate to say the word, but basically accept what's happened and grow from it. Now, I'm not saying get over it. You don't get over it. That's not what I'm saying at all. But you grow from it. So, but here Job is making this point to his wife. And I think that in this, he's also reaffirming that point to himself. When you say stuff, it's not enough that he didn't just think this. He says it. He says, "You're speaking as one of the foolish women speak." So in all this, Job he did not sin with his lips. He still has not accused God of wrong. He's not falsely accused God. All right, so we got a couple of minutes. All right, so have we ever as Christians, when some calamity befalls our fellow Christians, have we ever thought to ourselves that God may be at hand in punishing that person for the calamity that's befallen? I found myself guilty of that before. Somebody who is, something in their lives goes awry, and all of a sudden they find themselves in a position that they weren't once in, and I'm sorry for it, and I certainly I put that away. But there's sometimes that brief moment of, they're being humbled. God's humbling them, as if I'm responsible for divining the will of God and God's role in their life. Something that they lose their job they used to be making a lot of money, and now they're having to have you ever talked to somebody who feels that way? You talk to somebody and they say, "Well, and they proceed to pronounce some sort of a judgment that God's trying to teach them a lesson. Yeah, they need to be brought down a couple of pegs, and I've seen people say stuff like that, and I don't say things like that, but there's sometimes that brief moment of, then you have to realize that that's me divining God's intent, and that's not a good thing to do.
I'm not disagreeing, but I've experienced that. Well, God had to humble me in my life.
Certainly.
30 years ago.
Absolutely.
And I know what he had to do. He was trying to get my attention to get back on track. So I know what he did to me. You know, only God could have done that because I didn't listen to certain things. So I can experience that.
All right.
And nobody can tell me the difference.
But and if somebody had voiced that, what would your at the time that it happened? Oh, really?
My own mother, she never obeyed God, but she said God was trying to tell you something.
Yeah. Okay.
So she told me to my face.
All right.
You know.
All right.
So that I experienced that. And unfortunately,
I got you.
I'll say this to you. Unfortunately, certain things with my estranged wife and certain things, there's an old saying, you make the bed, you got to lie in it. There's certain things that she's doing that's happening to her, God is putting to her. God said, vengeance is mine. So I treat her right, but certain things that happen to her, and I put it in God's hand, God will deal with her.
Well, that's
so
the whole
before
point.
he just try to get back at her, that it would not be right as a Christian.
No.
To be vindictive. God's going to take care of that portion. I don't have nothing to do with it.
You're responsible for you and for your lesson, and not for somebody else's lesson. Yeah. Okay. Tell you what, we're going to let's do this real quick. The idea, of course, is that and disregard this. We're gonna. No, we're not going to. Oops. I'm learning this new remote. Okay. We're going to finish this up next week. I knew this was going to be one of those three lesson things. But if you think about the things that are coming out of Job's mouth, basically Job is already, he's displaying this idea of patience and long suffering. He's going to allow whatever he's not forcing God's hand. He's not pushing God for a resolution. He's accepting what God has done, and that's one of the beautiful things about Job. He's that idea of acceptance. Whatever God does, God does. And whatever God does is righteous. I don't know what's happening yet, and we get into we're going to get into the idea of Job beginning to question why it happens, but he never says anything other than God must have a reason for this. I just don't know what it is yet. And that feeds right into the idea of being long-suffering. The idea of long-suffering is not just meekly accepting. See, I don't want to give away next week. I'll tell you what, let's do. Let's go ahead and finish up, and I'll get into it next week, because I'm gonna play my hand, and I'm not ready to do that yet. So, anybody got anything they want to say before we finish this up next week? I love Job. Has anybody ever done a class on Job? Done a class on Job? Was it here? Was it Macklin? Okay. We might do that. It's a long book, but it's got so many great lessons in it, and I think Job would be a really good one. And I think a lot of people skip over the book because it's basically a conversation between four friends, and they think that there's nothing really in there for him. It was something that was specific to him, and it doesn't apply, and that's not true. There's some really great lessons, so we might do a lesson on Job here.
Job question God?
Oh, yes.
Where was the world and things like that? Of course, God gets to speak talking.
Well, God begins to ask Job a series of questions and saying, if you think you know me and you think you can divine me, but then he begins to ask him these series of questions, and he's asking these questions. They're I would consider them rhetorical questions because they're not questions that Job can answer, but they're questions that God knows the answer to, and he's saying, you think you know me, you think you can divine me, well, what about this, what about this, what about this? And Job basically says, I have no response. I have no response to that. Your ways are greater than my ways. Your knowledge is greater than my knowledge. Everything that you do is so far. I accept your will, whatever it might be. And like I said, it's a great book to read and study. So, all right, we'll finish this up next week, and I promise we will finish this up next week, and then we'll continue on in our study of fruit of the Spirit. We want to offer the invitation. If there's anyone here who needs to respond, if there's anyone here who has issues that we need to pray for, we're glad to pray. We know that prayer has done great things for this congregation, for our sick, for people who are having issues, for just some great things going on, and we want to give people an opportunity. If they do need to respond to the Lord's invitation, we want them to do so. If you have sin that you need to pray for, and we need to pray for you, we want to do that tonight. Whatever, if there's a need, we invite you to come while we stand and while we sing. If I crown thee.